Hey everybody, welcome back. This is Advanced 5 for Part 5 of Module 1. We're going to write a function called SumDigits. So you're going to get an input number and then we're going to add up the digits in that number and return that value. If the number is negative, the first value is going to count as negative. So 1 plus 4 plus 8 is 14. 6 plus 1 minus 3 is equal to 4. And it's got some notes about, changing from a string to a number, using toString and the number functions. So first thing that we're going to do is we're going to try to solve this under the assumption that the number is not negative. So essentially what we would do there is we'll make input number into a string. Then we're going to iterate over the string. And for each element, we're going to probably also want some sort of a create a total variable. And previously we'd done a thing where if we create a total variable, we would jump down to the bottom and return it. We're not going to do that for this one, and that's going to become clear why in a little bit. So make the input number into a string, and that would obviously just be the toString method. We're going to iterate over the string, which we can obviously do, and then for each element, we have a string version of a number, so we're going to want to convert current string character to a number and add to total. After we complete the iteration, we will have a value that represents the total. We're not going to quite return it just yet though. Well, let's return it for now. We'll say return total. So create a total variable. Total is equal to 0. Make the input number into a string. So we'll say variable num string is equal to num.toString. Iterate over the string. This one is pretty simple if you've been following along. Variable I is equal to 0. I is going to be less than numString dot length plus. And it says convert current string char to a number and add to the total. So total plus equals. The current value is going to be numString at I. And the number function is essentially like you wrap it around that. So we call it number with numString at I. And then we return the total. Now, I think that this is going to work in the event that we have a positive number. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up a REPL. We're going to test it out, mainly because it'd be nice to test it without running the function, just because it's not entirely obvious that the error messages are going to be perfectly, what would you say? It's not obvious that we're going to get everything that we need by running it, and we're not also, how do you say this? It is possible that we would do something that would lead us further away from the answer if we were to run the test right now. So the first thing we're going to do, because we know we weren't aiming at the entire problem, we said we're going to ignore cases where we have negative input. So in cases like that, it's probably a good idea to test them out in a separate environment. So that's what we'll use REPL for. In case you're curious how you get that sign, it's my trying to hit paste, and instead of hitting command, I'm hitting option. Option V gives you this like square root looking symbol. So there's our SumDigits function, and here's the test case, quick test case that they give us, where we assign a variable to be the result of calling the function on some input, and then we log that output, which is the return value from the function, to the console and check to see if it equals what it ought to. So in this case, if we run it with an input of 1148, we're going to get an output of 14. So if we run it, we get 14. Cool. So the problem with this is, let's say that we did, what's the other value they have us? Negative 316. For some reason, I'm not sure what we're going to get here, but I think it's going to be not a number, maybe? Exactly, not a number. Usually happens when you try to add something that isn't a number to a number. Here, we did total plus equals number of numString at I. So let's grab numString at I, and we're going to console.log that. All this is going to do is just give us an idea of what numString at I looks like each time we run the iteration. So at negative 316. So let's say that we got rid of the negative sign completely. If we were to get rid of the negative sign completely, we would have 10. Now, what I'm about to say might be a little bit, not intimidating, but it might be, how could I have thought of that? And like, you know, this would be you thinking like, how could I figure that out for the next one? That's not always the way you want to approach problems like this. In general, a lot of times, if you see a cool method or a new way of approaching problems, trying to figure out how you could have generated that yourself without any hints is not the appropriate course of action. The appropriate course of action is to try to not memorize the pattern, but get a sense of what the pattern is. And the pattern for us that we're going to do, first we're going to jump back to our actual function. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to check if num is negative. If the num is negative, instead of adding up the numbers, we're going to add up the numbers. Well, how do you say this? It's like, what we're going to do is we're going to check if the num is negative. Then we're going to get rid of the negative sign. And then we're going to save this information for later. So we'll check if the num is negative. So if num is less than 0, we want to do something. We want to get rid of the negative sign. So the way we would get rid of the negative sign would be num is equal to math.abs of num. We could also just say negative num, but this is absolute value operator or method, and it's a good one. So we've gotten rid of the negative sign, but we need to save the information for later. And essentially what we want to be able to do is at the very end, we want to be able to check to see, hey, was the initial value negative? So we'll say something like variable input is negative, and we're going to set that equal to false, meaning our assumption is that the input is not negative. If the num is less than 0, we have to change input is negative to true. So we've got rid of the negative sign and we saved the information for later. Now, well, let's go back. We'll copy and paste this over to our REPL. So we've done a little bit more. And let's see what we get now. So what we should get is something like 10, because we're not going to get not a number anymore. Let's see if we can, yeah, there you go, you can see the whole thing. So if we run this, we're going to get 10, hopefully. We want 4 though, and you may or may not be able to see this, but in order for us to get there, we want to take the first value that we should have subtracted, but we added. So if we should have subtracted it, but we added it, in order for us to get back to, you know, the appropriate value, we need to subtract that first number twice. So the way that we're going to do that is we need to hang on to the first value somehow. We have the first value here. Variable num string is equal to num.toString. So we have this num string value, which will allow us to access the first number because if you have the number 343, you can't really get that. Well, let's say 543. Right down here. If we have 543 saved in some variable, you know, something is equal to that, we can't really grab this. But if we have this in a string, we could grab something at 0, and that'll give us 5. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say variable first value is equal to num string at 0, and then we're going to make that a number. And what that's going to do is, now that we have our input is negative value, rather than returning total at the end, we're going to want to check our if the input is negative. So if input is negative, if the input is negative, or the input is not negative. So in the event that the input is negative, then we know we need to do that subtracting our first value from the total twice. So we need to say something like total is equal to total minus 2 times first value. because we're subtracting first value twice from the total. Otherwise, okay, and then after we do that, we could return total. And if input is not negative, meaning we don't really need to care about anything related to first value, we would just return total. So let's go over what we did again. First, we created a Boolean variable called input is negative, set it equal to false. Then we're going to check to see if the num is actually negative. If the num is negative, we want to get rid of the negative sign and register that the input was negative so that we can deal with it later. Then we're going to create a total variable, make the input num into a string, and then from there we're going to grab a first value and set that equal to a number version of the first element in our number string. This is okay, and then at that point we're going to iterate over the string, increment total by each number in the input string, and then we're going to check to see, hey, if the input is negative, if that value is true, then we know that when we should have subtracted the first number, we added it. So in order to get back to what we should be at, we subtract that first value twice, and that's what's happening here on line 28, and then we return the total. Otherwise, we just return the total as is. So let's run this one here. We get 4. So I would say that that's enough for us to run the tests. So we'll copy this, go back over to where we've written our function here, paste the whole thing back in there, and then run the tests. So we'll take a quick look at all the code again. And that's probably long enough for everyone to copy it off if they need to. This is no longer the case, so we might want to adjust this to say something like check Boolean flag, and let's say act appropriately. So yeah, there's our function, and we got it correct. So thanks for watching. I know this was a little bit of a longer video, and we did some things that we don't usually do, like taking it over to Replit, but keep in mind that this is a very comparatively advanced problem, so don't worry if it takes you a while to get it the first time, or if you're unable to get it and you had to come watch this video. Not to worry, recalling the pattern is mainly what we would want you to be able to do after the fact. So thanks for watching this video, and we'll see you in the next one.